Animation is often written off as a medium for children. The classification of animated media as cartoons doesn't help that either, and as a lover of animated films, I think that these claims are completely false. Not that there's anything wrong with more innocent and simple stories, but there are plenty of animated films that more than deserve to stand next to any Pixar film when it comes to popular acclaim. These are 5 mature films that prove the animation haters wrong. Before I begin, I'd like to clarify something. By mature, I do not mean adult. There are many adults that are not mature and many kids who are. Maturity isn't something that comes from age, it's something that comes from experience, knowledge, and self-reflection. Number 5. Now, what is misconstrued as mature more than sex and violence? Personally, I don't think that having violence or sex in a film makes it in any way more mature, but for the first spot on this list, I'm going to choose a film that breaks the unspoken rule and puts blood and breasts into an animated feature. There's several films that come to mind. Parts of The End of Evangelion are pretty brutal, as well as almost all of Unicorn Wars. Akira definitely has more R-rated content than your average Disney flick, but there isn't enough of it to crack this slot. Scavenger's Reign gave us some great adult animation last year, but that's a TV show, and it doesn't even compare to the first film on this list, Phil Tippett's Mad God. Mad God has everything that an animated film isn't supposed to have. Blood, guts, naked monsters, vomit, disembowelment, the list goes on and on and on. But don't let this description fool you. Mad God is much more than an exercise in animated grossness. Phil Tippett worked for over 30 years to create this stop-motion masterpiece that manages to turn its slime into a near-biblical story of existential horror. Now we jump to the genre that animation sees perhaps the least of: horror. Animated horror is a rare sight, but when it's done well, it can work to incredible effect. There are spooky films like Coraline and Watership Down, and more terrifying films like Perfect Blue and Tom C. Brown and Daniel Gray's short film, Teeth. The House is a very creative stop-motion film, but only a piece of it belongs to the horror genre. But it's a different stop-motion film with the word house in the title that sends shivers down my spine, and that's The Wolf House.
Maria. Fühlst du mich, mein Vögelchen? Hörst du mich?
Ja.
Weißt du, wo ich bin?
Nein.
Telling the tale of Maria, a girl who has escaped from a Nazi cult in Chile. She decides to run away and take refuge in an abandoned house hidden in the forest, where she begins to tell the story of the 3 little pigs, with the pigs being her children, and the wolf being the cult leader stalking the area around their house. This premise alone is already scary, but the animation of the wolf house is where the film really shines. Everything in the film is either painted on the walls of the house or constructed in front of the viewer out of tape. Without any real scares, the wolf house is incredibly disturbing. It strikes a very particular nerve in the uncanny, and if you already find stop motion unsettling, this movie is definitely gonna freak you out. Number 3. This slot is the slot dedicated to Studio Ghibli. Studio Ghibli has been pushing the boundaries of animation for decades, and their films are some of the most well-known mature animated movies of all time. But which Ghibli movie to choose? The Tale of the Princess Kaguya is definitely a thematically complex film, and Princess Mononoke is chock full of bloody action. The Wind Rises deals with the moral ramifications of making weapons, but in terms of maturity, there can be no other Studio Ghibli film like Grave of the Fireflies. Isao Takahate's war film is about a brother and sister who struggle to survive after their mother is killed in an air raid. One of the most powerful elements of Grave of the Fireflies is how much it looks and sounds like a Ghibli movie. The voice acting and animation style are things we associate with films like Howl's Moving Castle and My Neighbor Totoro, which makes the horrific events of the film even more brutal. Nothing prepares you for the emotional effect Takahata is able to inflict upon the viewer. Using a completely fabricated medium, Grave of the Fireflies is able to tell an only too real story. The violence is graphic, uncomfortably so for an animated film, but the movie also depicts beauty in the story's suffering. Grave of the Fireflies is one of the many masterpieces of Studio Ghibli, and stands as one of the best pieces of anti-war media ever made. Number 2. We've got violence, sex, fear, and Studio Ghibli. Maybe I needed to think through these categories a bit more. Anyway, the penultimate animated film on this list is getting political and or historical. There are films with simpler messages like WALL-E and Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind, which both explore the environment. But I'm not looking for simple message. I'm looking for the nitty-gritty animated movies that aren't afraid to tell it like it is. Films like this include The Breadwinner, taking on gender and repression in Afghanistan, or Persepolis, doing the same and more in Iran. But the movies that really hit home are animated documentaries, like Tower, Flea, and most especially, Waltz with Bashir. Director Ari Feldman attempts to piece together his own scattered memories of his time in the 1982 Lebanon War, and especially his part in the Sabra al-Shatila massacre in Beirut. Talking with other veterans, Feldman quickly discovers how much of the event is now shrouded in the fog of memory. Dreams and nightmares are mistaken for truth, and the crisp and muted animation style shows it all. Waltz with Bashir not only dives into the history of the Lebanon War, but the personal accounts of those who participated in it. Number 1. For the final film I want to highlight, let's step back, forget the violence and politics, and look for something much different. Call it character or philosophy, but these films strive to capture something both much more universal and yet remain personal to each viewer. It's hard to explain, but you can find it in Loving Vincent, Soul, and, again, in The End of Evangelion. It's achingly empty in Angel's Egg and awkwardly close in Anomalisa. But it's never been better than in It's Such a Beautiful Day.
I used to see at school how I used to wonder whether there were still somehow pieces of individuals inside, scattered fragments of partial dreams or lost memories locked deep within that dead tissue, or whether this entire archive is immediately erased the moment that the body fails.
Writer-director Don Hertzfeld's only feature-length film is made up of 3 of his short films, which tell the story of a man named Bill, who has an unknown brain condition that leaves him with only a short time to live. So Hertzfeld, with only stick figures, home video-esque footage, and classical music, tells a story of unparalleled humanity. It's Such a Beautiful Day is a film for everyone. It doesn't matter who you are or what you've experienced. The film is universal. With a runtime of only an hour and 2 minutes, you will laugh, cry, and understand something about yourself you can't describe. The maturity of It's Such a Beautiful Day comes not from anything unsuitable for younger viewers, but from the, and I hate to say this, the level of philosophical experience to understand the film. The largest change that comes with age and maturity is the understanding of morality. This is what makes It's Such a Beautiful Day such a mature film. For anyone who's old enough to contemplate existentialism, Bill's story will dissolve your soul and change your outlook on life. It certainly has for me, which is why I think it's a stirring example of how mature animated films can be.